Good afternoon. I'm here with my guest, Gregory Wolos. Wolos, right. Okay, and glad to see you. He has a new book out, Women of Consequences, book of short stories. Thank you for coming here.
Thank you for having me.
And I'll read a little of his bio. Over the last decade, Gregory Wolos' short stories have appeared in more than 70 journals and anthologies. His work can be found in publications like Glimmer Train, Georgia Review, Florida Review, Baltimore Review, and others. His stories have won awards sponsored by Solstice and Gulfstream, New South, and the Rubery Book Awards. And he has 6 Pushcart nominations. More often than not, his writing reflects Kafka's assertion that a literary work must be an ice axe to break the sea frozen inside of us. And he lives just outside of Somerville as a member of the Somerville Beggar Bards. And he's a fine gentleman. So I was going to start you out with, Poe, Poe, Edgar Allan Poe, and you refer to him in some of your short stories. He came up with the perfect short story, right, where there's a unity of theme, everything is unified, everything's an outfit, and everything's part of the outfit, and you set the tone in the beginning. And I noticed you like Poe. I'm wondering if you follow his formula. Would you say yours is a perfect short story?
Yes, I would say that my short stories are as perfect as I can make them, given the intentions I have. That doesn't necessarily mean I follow Poe's formula. I follow a formula that I feel is integral to the work as that particular work. Because the works come from a lot of different sources. So they come to lots of different kinds of conclusions. So I would say that each work finds its own form.
How do you mean?
Well, like, for example, some of the works use surrealism. Some don't at all. Some are very realistic. In some works, the surrealism is to me, psychological projection of the character. And maybe only one story in this collection, but other stories I write, the character is a ghost, and therefore it's part of the piece itself. So in that sense, the work finds its own way through those characters. Okay.
Have you ever experienced a ghost? I know people have.
No. Which is why I most often use them as psychological projections. But I also feel that a story is a story, so I have freedom to do what I want with the notion of surrealism. We're making a lot of choices when we write a story to begin with. We're leaving out a lot of what we would consider to be reality. So. No, I haven't had an experience with ghosts, and I shouldn't say that. Maybe I have, and I just don't know it.
Okay. Well, we all have ghosts in our lives, so to speak.
That's true. I mean, if alluding to one of the stories I have in there, the character is accompanied by what he calls the ghost of his mother, yet he says, well, but my mother's alive, so I don't know how she accomplishes this as he drives down the highway. So
I wouldn't want to be in the back seat.
You wouldn't want to be in that car anyway, as if you recall what happens to it. So the story is based on the Schoharie Bridge collapse of 1987, where on the New York State Thruway, where the bridge collapsed and cars just kept driving into this vacancy.
How was it living in upstate? I know Gardner, the famous...
Gardner was at Binghamton. While I was there, in fact.
What was his first name again?
John Gardner.
John Gardner.
Yeah, he wrote
some books on writing. And
the book on writing. I used that when I taught in school. I used his book, some of his exercises. He's from upstate New York. I'm not quite from that area. That's southern tier New York in Binghamton. I'm actually from Long Island.
Really? Where?
Yeah. Suffolk County,
I'm
Huntington.
from Rockville Center. Oh, yeah,
I was born in Mercy Hospital in Rockville
wow.
Center.
Jesus,
Well,
6
there you
degrees
go.
of
Look at that,
separation,
right? Brothers returned.
Yeah.
But I'm from we settled in the Albany area. I followed my wife to
Well, you got your PhD in
graduate
Albany,
school.
right?
I got my PhD at Albany State, yeah.
So someone quoted Kafka. I just read that it must be an axe to break the sea.
frozen
Fiction
sea.
literature must be,
Yeah,
be
the
an
frozen
ice axe
sea
to break
inside
the
us.
sea.
Absolutely.
Frozen. Now you seem to do this. You pick away. In the end, we have a sort of epiphany, or at least a character does. Could you expand on that a bit?
Well, I don't know if the character necessarily has an epiphany, or the reader has. I try to give the reader something. I try to give I try to give the reader an experience, and I don't know if necessarily the experience is a good one. But I don't. I mean, by good I mean uplifting in a positive, moral way that we often think about sentimental literature. I think of it more as like a crack, or maybe if you take that frozen ice metaphor and extend it, maybe a brain freeze, something like that.
Well, I did say to you at a meeting recently, I said, your stories are a bit bizarre, and you sort of went like that, but would you agree or not?
Yes.
Why were you seemed a little taken aback by that.
I'm not at all. Maybe I was acting like, what else?
Yeah.
That should be a given. I think so. I think my wife, when she used to read my stories, especially when they were new, or I was still working on them, which she doesn't do anymore. In fact, I don't let her read my stories till they've been published now, because I found her comments too discouraging. But it was mostly because she said, I didn't know that was going through your head, or how could such things be going on
that was
inside
my question.
your head?
I mean, where do you get, you have this, certainly you have a unique sensibility here. Where does it come from, you think?
Okay. I'm prone to say, if I really want to go back to my earliest roots as a reader and appreciator of literature, I think it goes back to the earliest Dr. Seuss my mother used to read to me.
Dr. Seuss.
Which means, for me, early Seuss. Not the Seuss that he's criticized for now for being culturally insensitive. Not that, but the Seuss before he became a moralist and wrote the books that people give to their kids to inspire them on high school graduation. Before that, because the parents are giving their kids
high school
they give they give their kids the the places we'll go.
Oh.
But to me, that book is just a book of platitudes. You can do this. You'll go here. You'll go far. Blah blah blah. To me, the great Seuss, the inspiring Seuss, was the Seuss of On Beyond Zebra, where he creates, he shows, he illustrates what creativity is. The characters go beyond zebra in the alphabet, and they create a series of new letters and the new creatures that go with those letters. He creates new things. If I ran the circus, he creates new circus acts. He shows, he doesn't say, he doesn't tell. It's a show, don't tell in that original Seuss. So there's that aspect of Seuss that I think I found inspiring. McGilligut's pool. You know, if this pool that I'm fishing in, which the child is mocked for fishing in this pool in the middle of a farm that goes nowhere, he said, well, maybe it's attached to an underground brook, and think of the fish that could possibly come into the air. And he invents all these wonderful fish. That, to me, is the benefit of Seuss. The other end of Seuss is, of course, that I think I benefited for as a young student of literature, was the anapestic tetrameter, the rhyme, the sense of musicality. Horton hears a who.
Is there a musicality to your writing? I mean, you would figure that being poetry.
Nope.
Yeah.
Although I enjoy a good metaphor, I probably have come to that out of another person I admire, who is Raymond Carver, in shorter sentences.
I love Raymond Carver.
Yeah.
I teach cathedral every year.
Cathedral, I taught Cathedral for years. Small Good Thing, those stories. Cathedral is a beautiful story. It's a cathedral in and of itself.
I remember I said to the kids, "Don't you love this?" I show them a little film of it, and they say, "It's all right."
Yeah, yeah, that's a defeat. But I find his prose more effective. And the third, I didn't realize Dr. Seuss was part of my trilogy, but I guess he is now. So there's that, and there's Kafka, of course, who I quote. So putting Kafka and Carver together, people say, how do you do that? Well, you have the sense of one. The creative sensibility, I think, of Seuss, and then the Raymond Carver for his prose, and also his sentiment, his touching of humanity. I don't know if he'd agree with the shake-up. Maybe his earlier stories. I think his earlier stories, maybe more so than the later, longer stories that didn't have Gordon Lish editing them. That might have something to do with it.
Now, you examine a lot of characters who are sort of prisoners in the world that they sort of make. They have a certain degree, for the ones I've read, obsessiveness about them. For instance, the woman who feigned being colorblind. Tell me about the sensibility that you people have.
All right. Well, my idea when I thought about what links the women. My first idea when I put this collection together was, I have a good chunk of stories about women. I have 25% of my stories are about women in one way or another as focal points, and what unites them. And then I say, really what unites them is what unites all of my stories. I take a character and who maybe is in a familiar role, and I intensify something about them, something of that role. So mothers are too motherly, like in the first story, Queen of the Waves. Can you be too much of a mother? Can you be too protective? Can you be too much of a friend where you're trying to do things?
Right? We know about
there you go. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So can you turn something on too intensely? So I think that's something the characters share, and it's almost like there's a kind of existential theme to each of them where they build a reality for themselves that they can live by. And it may not work out for them. I mean, it doesn't work out for the young woman who does the colorblindness, feigns the color, the Fiji Mermaid.
It almost seemed like she believed it, actually.
She sort of believes it, but then she needs to go look at her eyes. She needs this little collection of colored objects she has outside as a refresher. And in the end, she's longing for the guy who knew she was being false, who was the detective that determined she couldn't be in this dating organization for people with slight disabilities. Same thing with the mother in Queen of the Waves.
Did you do any research on Munchausen?
I didn't. I came up with the affliction that this mother had first. And then I realized that it was very close to what I knew of Munchausen's, though I will do research. Some of my most fun is, once I'm writing a story, is looking up to see details that I'm going to use in a story. Exploring certain things about them. But for example, now I'm working on a story about a young man has a father who died when he was just a baby. The father died in Vietnam. He was drafted. He had a low draft number. But the father is a twin. And the uncle is around still. So the man has had a chance to watch what his father would have been grow up as the twin. Now, the odd aspect is, the stuff I did some research on is the old days of having a draft number that you're probably just too young to have had one. Did you get one? You're a little younger than me.
1973 I did.
Okay,
but they
yeah.
pretty much closed it.
They had closed it out. But these twin brothers, they were born on different days. They were born on they were born around midnight. So one of the brothers had a very low draft number and was drafted, and the other one was. So I actually looked back at the draft records to find a date where one of the numbers would have been, one of the days would have been in the subsequent, a low number, and the subsequent day would have been a high number. Mm-hmm. So I'm plugging that into I'll use it in a story, mm-hmm. which is, by the way, how my stories get generated. I mentioned that before, that it was something I like to do. I note things down in my book. Mm-hmm. And then I have this, and then I'm going to combine it with something else to make a story. I'm actually working on that. Actually, something I heard in Bagel Bards. Somebody mentioned something about her daughter works in a toy hospital. So that to me is a fascinating concept. So that's in my notebook, and these are all somehow going to go together. The toy hospital and this and that, and it's like.
Did you have an experience with the draft?
I did not. I'm just like you.
The same age, right?
Yeah, we're basically the same age. So I got a number in the high 300 or like 330 or something like that, and was like, it was like great. But it's amazing how something like that can determine how you live and change your life. We don't really even think about that anymore.
Anyway, I was going to say, and they always ask this in the New York Times, and I like the question. In interviews, they said, well, I was also going to ask you before this, I mean, in essence, we create, and this book goes back in that, we create our own narratives in life. I mean, I started saying I want to be a poet, right? I could have started saying I wanted to be an accountant, but I wanted to be a poet, and I had this vision of what a poet's like, and I postured at first, and then it became real. So, I mean, you explore this theme of narratives, creating narratives for lives.
Yeah, I think so. Like the character in Fiji Mermaid creates a story for her life, like the mother creates a story for her life. The character of Annabelle has a story for her own life that she has fallen into a rut about, and that story was actually created for her because of her childhood, where she became a child actress and was not abused in the conventional sense, but was abused by a director who slid her into a role that wasn't for a child, and she's been living that out ever since. The concept of Svidrigailov's dream, where he dreamt of the little girl who he wanted to save, and in the process of dreaming about this girl he was going to save, she becomes a prostitute, and he's back where he started from, essentially. A wretched man.
Now, I'll ask you, why should we read this short story? Why should the reader read this short? That's what they asked in the New York Times.
Yeah, I think it's a good question. Well, I will say, because I think it's good for you, and in the sense of medicine, I think it's good.
But not like broccoli. People would
probably more like broccoli than ice cream. Ice cream is good for you, but then you like run around like a maniac and you fizzle out and fall asleep on the floor. Broccoli, you eat, and ultimately, if you eat enough of it, and it's like Popeye and spinach, it'll make you healthier and stronger. So I think that's the case with allowing yourself to have the sea frozen inside you broken. It lets in light. It enables you to think of things in different ways. It makes you a bigger person in some way.
It's good for you. That's what your mother said.
Really, you got right. And I think I try to give the reader that kind of experience. Now, again, as I say, I'm not sure that the stories are for everybody in that sense. Like my wife winds up enjoying some of the stories, although there are other stories she certainly likes better than others.
Anyway, I'd
Depends on
like you to read
dynamics.
from one of your stories. We have about 8 minutes.
Okay.
A little less than 8 minutes, actually.
I'll do my best to give you a bit of one of my stories. And we'll see if we can take it up to discovery. This is a story called Dr. Murrows Pet Shop, and I have to apologize for not being able to do the female consciousness, the female voice that's in my head doesn't come out of my voice. And that's very difficult when I have to do audios for various journals. But I'll try. Is there such a, this is called Dr. Murrows Pet Shop. Is there such a thing as being fresh out of rehab when it's your 6th time? Annabelle asked as she settled into the bucket seat of her convertible, coaching the B-list reporters who followed her after she'd signed herself out of the facility. Maybe say rotten out of rehab, or spoiled, or stale. Stale out of rehab, Annabelle Hadley. Which, in her condo, where an odor of something neglected in the refrigerator lingered, was exactly how she felt. Stale. And detached from the thickened figure facing her in her bedroom mirror. She wouldn't even try to lose the rehab donut weight this time. There seemed no point in whittling herself down to a self so easily condemnable. With less effort, she could crop her hair, maybe brutally short. The new look would match the voice that countless cigarettes had scrubbed into a growl. Annabelle's court-ordered abstinence from outside communication was over. And her agent had left word about a job on her voicemail. P.P. Frederico was remaking The Island of Dr. Moreau as a full-length animated feature. He wants you to voice a character named Maling. I told him you'd be thrilled. Annabelle hadn't been so sure. She'd seen enough has-been actresses lose themselves in the world of animation. Usually they'd be animals, gloriously feathered and distinctively beaked birds, sinuously waisted minks, cobras hooded like Cleopatra, that were all sad memorials to faded careers. She'd be turned into a cat, Annabelle guessed, with huge green eyes, a whiskey purr, and a slender body. For a cartoon, no one needed to trim down, either by exercise or diet pills or a finger down the throat. A Moreau script was delivered, but Annabelle didn't bother to read it. She knew the story. A crazy doctor on a remote island operates on animals, trying to turn them into human beings. Her character's name, Maling, hinted at a wickedly seductive antagonist, maybe with a vaguely threatening Middle Eastern allure. Too late in the arc of her reputation to give her voice to a heroine. It wasn't until the telephone interview arranged by the studio a week before recording was to start that Annabelle discovered what she'd gotten herself into. The interview began with the usual questions about her rehab stint and her legal trouble. Did she think she'd stay sober this time? Would she think twice before again leaving the scene of an accident? Would she consider an apology to PETA and the vegan coalition she had enraged with her observation that only stupid people don't eat meat? Meat, including brains, is brain food. Even zombies know that. Curled up on her bed in sweatpants and a too-snug t-shirt from her own scaredy cat line for tweens, she watched herself yawn and smoke in her dresser mirror as she asserted her every confidence and hope that her new sobriety would lead to better future decisions. Annabelle considered herself adept at deflecting awkward questions, provocatively yet insubstantially. When asked what she thought PETA's take on her involvement with Frederico's Moreau project would be, she saw the languorous drag she took from her cigarette and the careful way she patted the bed around her hips for the Snickers bar she'd half unwrapped before the call. She could still mesmerize herself with her own eyes, though at the moment they were no more bewitching than frozen peas. And when had her chin begun to melt into her neck? "It's just a cartoon," she said. "No animals, I can assure you, will be harmed during filming." The reviewer chuckled. "Right. But since Frederico has already commented on his intentions of releasing this as the first graphically violent cartoon in the history of cinema, shocking, I think was the word he used, do you get the feeling you were cast because of your comments on meat?" Annabelle watched her brow furrow, thought, worry, and deepened the frown. Cigarette ash dropped onto her chest into the open green eye of her t-shirt's winking scaredy cat logo. The identical logo was tattooed in color on the small of her back. "You mean, do I think it's unusual for a filmmaker to inspire interest in his film by introducing a note of controversy?"
Animals surgically altered, torn apart by Dr. Moreau and reconstructed as humanoids. Deformed, suffering creatures, treated first as experiments, then enslaved by the evil doctor. The reporter seemed to be reading this from a press release. What cartoon doesn't tear animals apart and make them half-human? Mickey Mouse and Goofy and Bugs. They're freaks, right? Talking biped animals. Bipedophiles. Is that a word? No. But the film's themes seem to glorify suffering. It's a horror cartoon, and I like meat. Well, are you put off by the absence of a female presence in the film? I'm Maling. Right. The interviewer waited. Annabelle traced a circle around her reflected face with her cigarette butt. She imagined herself with a snout and protruding yellow teeth, shivered, and looked away. Well, I'm sure that some suppressed sexual tension will bubble to the surface. Isn't that what horror films are all about these days? Red-lipped vampires burying their fangs into the necks of... Of course. But how do you feel about the fact that Maling is a male? Excuse me? How do you feel about the fact that for your first role in almost 4 years, you've been cast as a male? Annabelle pictured her script still in its FedEx envelope in the center of her black granite kitchen island. She wouldn't surrender the truth, that her career was in the toilet, and this was the only job she'd been offered. Sure, it's integral to the film. Mr. Frederico was an artist, and a certain liberation from convention should be expected. Are we almost over? My publicist is pointing at her watch. I think I have an appearance at a charity event scheduled. Annabelle watched the figure in her mirror tap her wrist. Just one more thing. How do you feel about the fact that Carl Walchuk is responsible for the screenplay? You know the Moreau project originated with his father, right? The production is something like a memorial to Raymond Walchuk. He gave P.P. Frederico his start, after all. Do you know Carl? Not really. Maybe we met at some child star thing 20 years ago before he quit acting. I don't remember if he was on the set of Svidrigaïlov's Dream, if that's what you're getting at. The whole mess with his father got settled and everybody involved moved on. Raymond Walchuk died years ago. I've really got no comment beyond that. After the interview, Annabelle shrugged back on her pillows and shut her eyes. Raymond Walchuk, the filmmaker responsible for Svidrigaïlov's Dream. Who would
Greg, we're about out of time. But thank you for joining us on Poet to Poet.